now I think we will briefly set the scene for the preparation of decision-making. So the assessment is closed and you send out the information. You send out the information to the monitoring committee members. And if you move on to the next slide, again, we have a huge diversity of approaches across the programs. But there is one, at least to me, from my personal experience, there is one key point: the weight of the assessment for the decision-making process. I have been working in a program where the assessment have been considered as information to the monitoring committee, but not more than that. So it was by no means binding, but it's quite clear that it can work, but it must not work. And it will, I assume it's hugely different in other programs. This is what we're going to hear. Again, preparing for decision-making, transparency is a key requirement. And it's quite clear that monitoring committee needs crisp and concise information, but we think it's important that there is always the option for anybody in the MC to see all documents if persons would like to have it. It's quite clear it becomes increasingly challenging when you have high numbers of applications to each committee meeting. There is many, or I think most of the programs have national committees, and we see their role somewhat ambiguous. Of course, it's good for testing waters, in particular if you're working for the MA, for the national authority, for the Joint Secretariat. You get a feeling about the opinions on the projects, but there is also a bit an adverse tendency in the impact of such committee meetings. It might strengthen a unilateral perspective on the project, because it's not what should happen. For example, that the representatives of the ministries of both ministries of transport of the two countries meet and jointly have maybe a first look into the project, but it's purely from a national perspective. And that may have a huge weight, which is even sometimes pre-decisive, in particular in cross-border programs. And another aspect which may be important in some countries using lower ERDF rates in their programs, where the match funding provided by different levels, different tiers of the government may play a huge role. Because it's quite clear, if I'm willing to provide a substantial amount of match funding to a certain project, it is influencing to some extent my approach or when coming to the decision making. These are just a couple of initial thoughts. And here we can also stop sharing the slide. And now my question to Nathalie, if you would like also to say a few words on the step assessment closed, decision being prepared. Nathalie, would you like to say something on that before we come to testimonials from the colleagues?
A couple of thoughts. Indeed, this is an even more, let's say, difficult area to find simple answers, because it is a complex process, and the decision-making process by the monitoring committee or the steering committee contains a lot of considerations that from the outside world can really be sometimes perceived as making the decision a little bit fuzzy, or possibly not always making the decision for the right reasons. So we brainstorm a bit here between the two units, D1 and D2. One of the things is that, of course, the different the method for reaching a decision depends also on the program, because if you think about it, a transnational program with 10 member states or 10 countries, whether they are member states or not, will probably go for a consensual decision where if a majority is happy with the project is selected. At least that was my experience when I used to be in the unit having transnational programs. When you have interregional programs, Nicolas can maybe come back again and say, okay, this is a monitoring committee of all member states and partner countries, and there, I don't think there is another option than consensus for them, but maybe he can tell us how they do it. When it comes to bilateral program, CBC, internal, IPA, or next, of course, you are in a different situation because you have people who are very, very close, basically, to the territory in which the projects are going to be implemented, and therefore you have a lot of different interests that are at stake, and it probably becomes a little bit more difficult to decide on the decision-making process. What I wanted to say is that, well, first of all, certainly quality of the project must be paramount. Okay, the CBC dimension we discussed already. For me, that's absolutely a must. But then the quality is very, very important, and therefore the ranking, the idea of a ranking and a threshold of minimum quality seems to us to be fundamental. The Court of Auditors confirmed that when they assessed 23 methods. They also said ranking and having really top quality projects on top is very important. What I find difficult in a cross-border context is this one delegation, one vote. I'm scratching my head to try and find advantages for this particular method. And I'm sure the practitioners after me will probably give me some good reasons for doing that. Having observed that in a wide variety of programs, I have never really been satisfied with that method. First of all, you then go from, the starting point is cooperation. That's the starting point of everything we do. And then when it comes to decision making, you split the audience between side A and side B. And people are face to face instead of hand in hand, and I find that extremely disturbing. My second point on that is, how do you then ensure that the partnership principle is actually not just a gimmick, but a reality? Because you might have civil society from both sides that has the same opinion. So how do they express their opinion? If then there is one vote by a national delegation, I have no idea how that works. I have seen in practice that some people around the table, members of the monitoring committee, simply don't express their opinion because they are afraid of the chair of the national delegation. And so we end in a situation where we don't have a partnership principle, we don't even have a respect for the views of different members of the monitoring committee. So I find that very disturbing. And as you rightly said, Bernhard, another consideration, which in my opinion sometimes changes the nature of the discussion, is indeed the co-financing and who brings money and the juste retour and calculating how much money each, particularly in the case of regional administrations, who gets what. Of course, my role is to say that this cannot be the decision-making criteria. It cannot be. It's my job to say that, because it's EU money largely. Even some programs have a low co-financing rate by the EU. It's 50-50 maybe, but in the vast majority, we are well above 75%. And so the money is really European taxpayers' money, and we have to spend it for what it's meant. And it's not meant to be spent, equally in every region. It's meant to be spent to reach certain impact in a defined program area. So that's the one method where I would really, I'm very reluctant, very, very reluctant. Managing conflict of interest is, of course, important as well. Indeed, we have people representing institutions or authorities, which then have also projects submitted. We've discussed this at length in the beginning of the 14-20 period. I don't think there is a need to rediscuss it. We've also shared mails with programs, and Interact has tools on how to do that. So I would say this is also fundamental. You need to respect that. And the separation of function discussions we had earlier also comes into play on managing conflict of interest. Voilà, that was really my consideration. Again, I know I'm very aware that I defend moral principles, but I think it's the role of DG REGIO to do that. So really think carefully about the role of each member of the monitoring committee. If you have a monitoring committee of 20 people, but only 2 speak, or 2 have the right to express a national view, well, it's not putting in practice what the regulation says. And here I would actually say that it is not regulatory to do that, because it's absolutely not the idea of a monitoring committee. Voilà, I know I'm a bit strong, but you know me, so I just say it as I feel it.
I have to say I'm always grateful for that, Nathalie. Really, honestly. Now, I would like to come to the colleagues presenting their approaches, and maybe this time, Chiara, are you ready? This time, maybe ladies first. And could we share again Chiara's presentation on the 2 slides on preparation of decision-making, to immediately step to the preparation of decision-making? I think there was one before on preparing, yes. And Chiara,
yes, this one.
Yes,
this one. So in the preparing decisions, first of all, we have fixed a small group coming from appointed by monitoring committee called the steering committee, acting on its mandate with a small group of people with specific capacities and specific technicalities. Because of this kind of committee is responsible for one single criteria, was responsible for one single criteria with totally 10 points, and which rely on the compliance of the proposal with national and regional policies reflecting on actions and outputs that precisely address concrete needs of the territories, of course, involved. It involves a suitable partnership and, able to reach the expected impact. How this kind of steering committee works, where we have sent, of course, during the procedure of the targeted call, we have sent the list, the first ranking list prepared by the joint steering, by the JS, with in this situation with comments, with the written short description of the proposal, and with the description of all the shortcomings that we found in the assessment procedure, in order to give the possibility to them to start an internal discussion with a physical panel, and in which the JS is involved with the steering committee in one day, in which we discuss all together about the scoring and the ranking list prepared for them. So it's an open discussion. And what is worked well is the accountability and the transparency of the steering committee. First of all, because they have, in a formal way, 10 points to be added, or to be added to the JS or NIPS points in the ranking list, with a table in which has been identified a column with the scoring of made by JS and NIPS together, and another column with the scoring of the steering committee. Further, the cooperative approach at the steering committee, of course, it was very, very good, but is dependent on the personality involved in these small groups, but of course is usual. Also, it was very relevant, the replying of any questions answered at steering committee meeting by JS assessors in order to create a common understanding and an harmonization of the methods of the methodology applied in the ranking list prepared for them. Of course, what has to be improved, we believe that a typical point during the steering committees was that they were interested only on few projects, and we think that this is an interesting points of improvement, because seems that there could be possible some bilateral interventions from other kinds of organizations or people before starting the steering committees. So, of course, the conflict of interest could be a potential problem in this kind of rules. But we have addressed and we have fixed very much this kind of intervention by the steering committee involved in order to guarantee a separation from technical point of view and steering committee point of view related to the final scoring and the final decision making to be made by the monitoring committee. So next slide, please. Next slide. So the decision making in the formal monitoring committee, of course, the monitoring committee has the final word for everything, but in reality, the monitoring committee accepted all previous assessment made by JS, NIPS, and steering committee, approving at all the ranking list, with the exception of only one project in our case, in our experience. Because the monitoring committees identified one strategically important project for linked with the Tirana Capital of Youth 2022, which received only one additional point at the end of the decision-making procedure. So, of course, the cooperation feeling during the monitoring committee worked very well, because there weren't any kind of discussion during the meeting. The joint secretariat was present during the meeting and has replied to any questions also coming from the monitoring committee. Next slide, please. And of course, we remind in several ways, and in each step of this kind of procedure, we remind that all the assessors, as well as the monitoring committee and the steering committee, had to act in the joint interest of the program area and focused very much on cross-border importance. Because the cooperation character was identified, of course, for our program, that is a trilateral program, and so the cross-border program was identified with a very relevant topic to be taken into consideration. All persons concerned signed impartiality declaration, and also cases of potential biased position were declared, in which the monitoring committee, the members of the monitoring committee refrained from the from voting. And on the other side, the assessor, on the side of the assessors, the project was swapped with other unbiased assessors in case of potential conflicts of interest. I think that I have finished. I don't have any other any other things to add, but feel free to ask me whatever.
Just
because in a certain way we consider some aspects that other colleagues has expressed as physiological and not needs to be presented here.
Just one brief question. The voting principle, is it consensus? And
yes.
And you have one delegation, one vote principle, or the consensus among the whole MC? So is it national?
Delegation is from one delegation, one for each delegation.
One vote each delegation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chiara. And now I'm looking. Gabi, may I ask you next to give us a brief into how you are doing it in your, or how you plan to do it in your program based on the experience from the previous program?
Yes, thank you, Bernhard. I will continue to just talk without any slides for now, and I jump into the fact that we have two steering committees in the Interreg Aurora, one for sub-area Aurora and one for sub-area SAPMI. And it is the role of the respective steering committee to prioritize applications. And as you know, it's the monitoring committee that adopts the rules of procedure for steering committee and also adopts the selection criteria. And the selection criteria is, how should I put it, the foundation both for the JS to present proposals and for the steering committee when they execute their prioritization in the end. And regarding what kind of material the committee get for each project, we plan for that the steering committees will access, of course, the written proposal from the JS and also all applications that will be discussed by the committee. And at the steering committee meeting, we plan for JS representatives to be present to shortly present the proposal and answer any questions by members in the committee. And yes, Bernhard.
Just you send also a ranking list, or do you have a ranking and a ranking list which is
yes.
sent to the steering committees, and to which extent is it decisive? Does then the steering committee follow it, or is there, how do you handle this one?
Each application which passes the eligibility check will then be put forward to the steering committee. And in the proposal from JS, there is a total scoring. I mean, there are scoring for each sections in the criteria, but also a total scoring. And we will not have the first meeting until November, but I believe it will be clear to have some kind of summary to send out to members apart from all the proposals, also to show a summary. This is the ranking from top to bottom. But at the meeting, the committee has the authority to turn it upside down if they could justify other opinions. I mean, it is the same method to be used by JS and the committee, but it is meant to be a fruitful document for further discussion at the steering committee. And the voting principle in the monitoring committee as well as the two steering committees will be consensus with one member, one vote. So it's not any national delegations. And I already commented on that question, I think.
I think there will be also other questions coming up in slide, but take home from you that you really have consensus, but it is really consensus among all members, no national
Yes.
delegations, which is also
No.
an interesting approach, which I think is not that common across the world of Interreg programs. That's, yeah. Then I think we move on to Jan and Maciej, maybe to tell us also their preparation of decision-making. And I think, should we set up the slides again? And no. You just briefly tell us.
Probably, I think we can a little bit go on without presentation, maybe really briefly. The decision about the projects during the meeting of monitoring committee is based on the assessment of the project. It's a ranking list. It's a short card of the project. That means a description of the activities of the project, basic information about the partners, and complete assessment. That means the comments and score. But how told Jan in the first part of presentation, our monitoring committee has in this part of making decision a few limitations. The first one is that the project must reach at least 70% in the first four strategic criteria. And the second one, that the total score must be at least 70% of total points. The project which are below this line, the monitoring committee is not able to discuss and change the result of this assessment. That means the monitoring committee in this part make decision a little bit more automatically. But for me, the fundamental part when the monitoring committee is more important is the setup of the rules of calls, because we discussed there the needs of the regions, the cross-border potential of the needs, and I think the result of assessment is a little bit like a template, because monitoring committee, before it approved the criteria of assessment, JS made the assessment due to or according to the rules which was set up, and of course the discussion is more sometimes about some condition of the panel of each part. And of course, the most important part and the role of JS, how said Nathalie in the first part, is explain to the members of monitoring committee why this result is in this ranking list. That is the result of the independence assessment. We describe shortly the output of the project and the opinion of the expert, like a recommendation general. And I think the really important part is to show them to the members of monitoring committee why the result is in the ranking list and why. And I think this discussion about the results, it's more to show the result of good quality assessment, less about discussion about the quality, because I think the member of monitoring committee is like a prolonged hand to the regions, less about the technical things and agenda about the assessment. It's pretty important during the setup the calls, during the setup of the conditions for the calls, what is the need. For example, we had in a program three special calls. Two was about like a post-COVID. One was about the post-COVID restart of tourism, cross-border tourism. The second was restart of cross-border cooperation in thematic 11, that's international. And now we have a special, really interesting call for integration of migrants from Ukraine to react for this really hard situation. And I think this is the role of monitoring committee, and following assessment is kind of more about techniques and about to keep the rules which the monitoring committee set up for us like a JS. The documents are a few documents for every project. I think it's sufficient for them. And of course, we follow the conflict of interest, not only in the express in 3 steps, but in the same conflict interest of the concrete members of monitoring committee. And I think the European Commission, our desk officer, is glad that we are really strictly keep these rules and implement it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Maciej. Jan, would you like to add something? Because I liked very much that monitoring committee is put into the role of really being a strategic committee, plus acting more as a guardian of the rules and less so being directly involved in the bazaar about projects. This is a dimension I like very much. I unfortunately didn't experience that much in my career when working, but I think you've done a good job in bringing it there, because that takes also a lot to come to where you are now. And that's
maybe
I think
I would
a
just
long process to come there.
I would just maybe add one thing. I've noticed before the break in one of the questions, if it happens, if it means that monitoring committee always automatically votes according to ranking list, that's the most desirable option. And in 99% of cases it happens. It only happened once in one project during the whole programming period that the monitoring committee decided in contrary to the ranking list about one project, but always it has to be backed with some good reasoning. Otherwise, we are, as managing authority, always against this principle, because we don't want to the system and the principle of assessing the projects by external experts to be hindered by rather political decisions on monitoring committee. So in this sense, really, monitoring committee is really automatical body, and it respects ranking list in 99% of the cases, and it's rather strategic, as Maciej and you said.
May I ask also one question to both of you, because what I observed is that conditions, they are also something quite ambiguous. Because sometimes I had a feeling that I experienced that conditions may go way too far, and strictly speaking, you should resubmit and adjust the project and come back to the next monitoring committee, instead of, let's say, approving a project having 5 to 10 conditions on what project actors should do. Can you tell us quickly your handling of decisions, of conditions, sorry?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's of course the conditions are more technically, again, it's about, for example, when the experts discuss about the I don't know, efficiency of expenditure in the budget of the project, and sometimes it's too less information for concrete parameters for concrete expenditure. And the condition is that after the monitoring committee decision, we call to the lead partner of the project to add some additional information about this expenditure. And after this additional information, we again, 2 experts, one Polish and one Czech expert, again assess this concrete expenditure between to the sign of the contract of the project. That means it's a more technical condition. It's not about, for example, output of aim of the project. No fundamental things, no crucial, more technical. Of course, the assessment is like a concrete, it's a work of 6 people together for X% 2 managers of JS. And of course, sometimes some individual point of view is more detailed, or it's connected with the experience of the concrete experts. And sometimes we need to set up some condition to explain some question of the experts. But in general, it's about more technical things. And of course, after them, we verify the result of this condition again with connection experts. That means, again, the first see this, the result of the fulfill this condition. It's not about like I don't know, partnership, cross-border impact or something. No, it's about really taking things, this condition.
At least be my advice from the experience I had, to really limit and regulate the use of conditions in the process of project approval.
Yes,
And
of course.
I think this is a good example that you set. I had the feeling you set quite strict limits, what can be subject to conditions and what cannot.
Yeah, and this idea of it is not to decrease the score of the criteria. Sometimes it's like an explanation on the side of the lead partner, and the idea of this tool is to verify some technical things and go on with the good quality project. Of course, it's, this is the idea of this tool.
And another question: in case of rejection, what's the information the project gets? I mean, approval is always easy to communicate. We all know that. Rejection is a bit more difficult.
Rejection, I don't think so, because for our monitoring committee, we have a really clear rules. For example, this limitation of the total score, this 70%. And I think the discussion when monitoring committee can't discuss about is really clear. And of course, when we present the rejected project, we prepare some presentation. We show why this project is mainly has the lower cross-border impact or the not good quality cross-border cooperation. And of course, we explain the members of the monitoring committee why the project was rejected by the experts or why they reached so low total score. But of course, again, after the monitoring committee decision, in this case negative, the beneficiary can see the total score, which is anonymized without the name of the expert. And of course, he can applying to the decision. And in this case, managing authority check that JS and the experts went by the rules of the common solution. That means, of course, it's really participated process on all sides of the assessment.
Thanks again. And now I'm asking if Nicolas is still there, because I think we've heard now many points from cross-border programs, and I think we agreed that the world becomes a bit different the more member states are involved. It's, let's say, the weight of technical procedures becomes stronger against rather personal opinions. And yeah, would you share a bit how you do it in Interreg Europe, the preparation of decision-making and how decision-making works?
Yes, sure. So, can you
yes,
hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Perfect. Yes, thanks, Bernhard. Well, it's nothing extraordinary compared to what we heard this morning. When we finalize the assessment, this is based on scores, obviously. The scores give an average scoring per application, and only the application that reach a certain scoring are recommended for approval. When this is finalized, we have a long list because we receive sometimes 200 applications, and they are ranking from the highest to the lowest. And this is sent 3 weeks before to the partner states. Then the partner states have possibility to ask additional clarification on the assessment before the monitoring committee takes place. And this is sometimes interesting because it allows us to clarify certain elements before the discussion takes place. But then on the committee itself, the decision is taken on the basis of this list. We have in our rules of procedure, in principle, a consensus on the decision of projects. but we end up in a kind of Kafka situation, I would describe it, in the 2014-2020 period, the first meeting in Marseille. The one who were there are still traumatized, I think, where the system eat itself, and we are realizing we need a plan B than the consensus, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. So we try the consensus, which work in most cases. Otherwise, if it's not possible, it's a 5-6 majority. So depending on the quorum who is there, but you need to be at least 5 or 6 member states to object then on the proposal of the technical recommendation. That's how it goes. In the vast majority of the cases, as the colleague just explained, the partner state, they follow the technical recommendation. We had just an exception in the last call where the member state decided to go below the threshold and to approve all the projects that were scored just below 3.0 in our cases. So in a way, we had to review a bit these applications and design condition, very strict condition that could help them to reach the minimum quality standards of the program. And these conditions were approved by the partner states because usually we always also send the conditions with a recommendation. The last thing I wanted to say, because for us, to be honest, sometimes it's easier than in cross-border. I was very lucky to start in cross-border programs for several years. Then I work in transnational, I developed transnational projects, and I end up in interregional. My impression is that in the cross-border, the political weight is sometimes even too heavy in a sense, because it's very easy to go against all the technical requirements. In the interregional cooperation, it's the opposite. I think the technical has too much weight compared to the political, and sometimes our members say they have the feeling of losing control, of losing power, because it's more difficult for them to object to what we say. I think the transnational is a very nice size to ensure a right balance between the technical recommendation and the political decisions. That's a bit the way I see it, but this is what I can say on our experience at least.
Thank you for sharing that so openly with us. This is very useful, very helpful. And I'm turning my eyes to Robert. Did we receive any questions in Slido?
Yes, we have several questions, and actually 3. 2 to Gabriel. One to Gabriel, 1 to Chiara. I will share the screen. Let me. One second.
Screen sharing started.
Yes, so I think the first one is for Gabriel.
I can answer that one.
Yes.
To be brief, it is because we have 2 geographical sub areas within the program geography, and one is sub area SAPMI, which consists of SAPMI representatives from all 3 countries, and in the Aurora committee there are. And it's also a larger geographical area in the countries in the SAPMI area, so that is why it is different. But it is one program budget with 2 geographical areas, and so it's not budget for each sub area. But it has been dealt with that way in Interreg Nord previously as well, and it has worked fine. And I believe, as in other programs, it's quite clear according to the regulation which kind of representatives there should be in the monitoring committees, and in the steering committee there are more sort of regional level and close to the ground level representatives.
So in your steering committees, you don't have the ministries at national level, but rather the regions represented, or you have also ministries represented according to the competences in the countries in the steering in these two steering committees?
No, to be clear, it is not fully clear yet the full representation in the steering committees, but in the previous period, in the steering committee in both programs, since both Nord and Botnia-Atlantica had steering committees, there were no national representatives from ministries or national agencies. There were from organizations based in the program geography.
But all from public institutions, so no experts from academia or...
Yeah, and a business representative from business organizations as well.
Okay. So you had in the steering committee also a bit of a wider representation, business, if you say business organizations represented.
I realize I mixed it up with the monitoring committee. The business sector is represented in the monitoring committee. They are supposed to be project actors, and they are not suitable for being in the steering committee because of that.
Yes. Thanks, Gabi. Okay, then. Okay, it's quickly moving. There is a question to this letter. I think it was not a letter on separation of functions, but rather on the project selection you've mentioned before, and if it's also addressing CBC next programs. Maybe
we will do that internally here, D1, D2, and possibly with you, Interact, to make the letter available. But it was a D2 letter, right? It was for internal CBC, and it was about the role of regional antenna and the fact that they combine far too many functions.
So we will share the letter after this meeting. Okay, then there is a question to Jan.
Yeah, I think I've already touched this. It may happen that the monitoring committee deviates from the decision and ranking list, but it only happens exceptionally. It only happened once. And even in this one case, I think the reason was that the monitoring committee disagreed with the rationale of the experts. All the recommendations or conditions from the experts had to be argumented, backbone somehow, and in this one case, monitoring committee disagreed with the rationale, but otherwise it always respects ranking list. That makes it simpler.
And I think it's addressing Chiara, the role of the national information points, whether it's then in the steering committee, monitoring committee. If you could briefly explain again, because it seems to be of interest to other people how to involve these national information points in the program decision making.
I read here if the NIPS participate to the monitoring committees. It depends, because for Montenegrin partners, the NIP participate always. For Albanian ones, no. For Albanian side, no. Participate only the national delegation and the national authority. And so depends on the country in this particular way, this particular issue. And also in the steering committee meeting, participate only JS members. That's why I talked before about liability, formal liability of NIPS, because their intervention during the assessment is informal, is managed internally with a virtual meeting between JS and NIPS, all together in a virtual meeting in which we change just a bit some scores. According to some specific, as I said before, according to some specific criteria related to the partnership and related to the impact in a special way, to the project impact, the proposal impact on their specific territories, and related to the partnership on the competencies, on the experience, and on financial capacity to manage this kind of proposals. That's all. They haven't any formal rule in a certain way.
So, Chiara, if we still have you here, can you also answer the other one? So what is an average number of project applications received per call?
Yeah, 113, 120, 113. It depends on the two calls.
Quite a huge number.
Yeah, we are a trilateral. We are very, very small program. Yeah, we received a lot of feedback and in our program, but we have organized at the beginning a lot of meetings, a lot of trainings, a lot of info days in order to capture as much as possible potential beneficiaries.
Thanks, Chiara. Now to Nicolas. If you maybe could briefly tell us about the documents you have, and I understood you're willing to share everything, but maybe it's good if you quickly recapture what type of documents you've developed for your program.
Yes, I've already shared a few on the chat. I don't know if you have access to them. I hope. Maybe the chat is not accessible.
It went to me.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Yes, it's
Nico,
true.
I'll share it later on. This is no problem.
I will share it with everybody, because just to summarize, I attached an example of the agenda of our quality assessment briefing. Maybe it can be useful. I have also attached what is much more interesting, I think, for the community is our internal quality assessment guidance with a lot of information on each criteria, but also on the form, what you should say, what you cannot say. So I will share it again with everybody. Sorry for that. And I also attach a small presentation that we use during that quality assessment briefing that summarize the main recommendation we give to assessors. Maybe it could also be used. We have a lot of other documents, so please do not hesitate to contact me directly if you want to know more about what Interreg Europe is using.
Thanks, Nico, for supporting and sharing. And this is also an open invitation to everyone in the room. If you have the feeling this is a good approach and it could help others, please send it over to us. Then we can take over dissemination, because in best case, we develop a huge set of documents under these two events, because it's now, the time is now to think, to develop your approaches to it.
Bernhard, just a small technical issue. It seems that I can only share to a certain number of people, but not to all. So if you don't mind sharing.
Of course, it will all be
lot.
shared. No
Thanks a lot.
problem. And here comes now a bit of a hot potato, back to Nathalie. It's about the partner involvement and the one delegation, one vote. If you'd like to share a bit your considerations on that.
Okay, I like hot potatoes.
I had a feeling, because we all know that the broader partnership in Interreg.
No, but look, I can only say that we will certainly pay a lot of attention to how the partnership principle is implemented. There is an article in the regulation. It's a requirement. Plus, there is a code of conduct. So we have enough here to be sure that the programs comply. At the same time, it's not just about compliance. It's about why are we doing this, and the value that partners, let's say non-governmental organizations, can bring to this process, and the fact that it cannot be just, as I said before, a gimmick. It has to be real. If you think about that, if you are in their shoes and you are only invited as an observer, for instance, and your opinion is never really taken into account, would you spend time and resources looking at the applications, for instance? Would you invest into this if at the end of the day, what you say can simply be dismissed or not heard? I have been in one monitoring committee where an environmental NGO made absolutely beautiful points, researched, thought through, constructive. And at the end of the day, the monitoring committee members were more or less laughing. Huh? So this is not the partnership principle. So I would say this third voting block, why not? Why not? It could be an option to, if you keep having the one vote, one delegation, which I would recommend not to do. But if you do, why not have a third voting block of civil society, for instance? I would be interested to see how that goes. But if you give them no role to play, then please don't be surprised that they are not interested, and don't come to us to say, oh yeah, but they don't want to and they have no capacity. Those who say that is normally those that are only treated as observers, and they are right in not investing so much. So that's my point on that. Yes, I had a couple of more things, but maybe we can do that in the conclusions. Although there is a question on up and down. Can I take that too?
Yes, of course.
I would recommend not to move projects up and down in the ranking list, because you undermine the whole assessment process if you do that. You imply possibly that the assessment is not correct. You might even imply that you have no trust in the assessment process. So I would certainly not recommend doing that. What is possible though, and this is not illegal, is that the monitoring committee decides to pick one project a bit lower than another one, if there are very good reasons for doing that. But I would certainly not change the ranking. But I don't think it's illegal to go to jump a couple of projects and to go a bit lower. Why? For reasons of maybe availability of funding. You don't have enough for another big project, but you do have enough for a smaller project. For me, that's a perfectly good reason to reorganize the project that are selected. But I would not change the ranking. And then on technical adjustments, we discussed that, Bernhard, as well. I would say, yes, having all these conditions to approve, I think, is not a good practice either. However, in some cases, you have no other option because you feel or there is a good project there, but maybe the application hasn't been done as well as possible. I know that a couple of programs have this technique of doing pre-contracting visits, which is not a bad thing to do, to sit down with the project partners before you sign a contract, so that you can also clarify a number of things, but you can in no circumstances change the nature of the project, obviously, just for very technical issues. I think that might be a good practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathalie. Then there is another question to Nico. It is, I understand it like that, if there is any kind of direct contact between project applicants and the assessors during the evaluation process, if there is any inbuilt element on that.
Yes, so thanks for this question. There is I would say a technical reason and then a quality reason why we don't do that. The technical reason is that we receive more than 100 or 200 applications at each call, and it would not be feasible for us to do that. But much more important, and I would come back to Robert's remark on the importance of focusing on the application form alone. We are extremely careful to the equal treatment principle, and we even refuse to have any contact with the projects, with the applications, let's say, during the assessment phase. And we cannot take into consideration any other information that is not in the application form during the assessment process. We had a very interesting discussion with our partner states, for instance, because one major source of weakness of our applications was a lack of policy relevance of the partners that were coming. And then the partner states was telling us, yes, but I know this organization. I can confirm you it's a very good organization and they can influence policy making. And we told them the problem is that it's not reflected in the application form, and the explanation provided in the application form is not satisfactory. If we stop doing that, we open the Pandora box and we put in question the whole quality assessment approach and even legality, I would say. So we don't have audition, but perhaps again, this is mainly related to Interreg Europe characteristics, I would say.
Thanks a lot. And in the meantime, I tried to share the documents you've sent to me in the chat. I hope it worked now to everybody.
Thanks for this, yes.
And do we have another question to Nathalie? Quite common setting is that member of Joint Secretariat presents the project evaluation, the project itself, a summary, the project evaluation at a meeting. I mean, I was myself in the position, and we used to say, we need these 2-3 minutes for the monitoring committee members to get prepared their own files, to get ready for the decision-making process. That was the pure technical reason. Because to put it mildly, we knew that some of our MC members were not inclined to read a lot before the meeting. So they somehow needed their time to get an impression, bluntly speaking. But I know it is, of course, can become a manipulating exercise. It can be nasty for the person from JS sitting in front of the MC, suddenly defending or getting attacked, being attacked on purposes unknown to this person. So yeah, curious to hear your thoughts on it, Nathalie.
Thank you, Bernhard. Well, my thoughts are very much along the lines that you've just said. At the end of the day, I think we know the monitoring committee members are very often incredibly busy people who indeed won't have time to read, certainly, a 10 pages evaluation of each project, and that makes no sense in a way. But I like very much what Nicolas said about building this trust between the assessment part of the process and then the decision part of the process, with these joint conversations between the assessors and the monitoring committee. I would strongly recommend that at the beginning of the programming period, where you're discussing the rules of procedures, I would really encourage you to find a way to do some trust building activity with the members of the monitoring committee and the JS, and of course the MA, to make sure that they can have confidence in the quality of the work that is being performed by the assessors, whether internal or external. And maybe it's a question of having half a page per application, you know, according to the ranking, which give the top 3 reasons why the project should be financed, for instance. You could do that. I very much want to protect the members of the JS. I think that in some cases, these people are being very unfairly treated and exposed to some pretty rough and rude behavior by monitoring committee members. And I think that's not on. So we should try to find ways to protect them. At the same time, you know, if it's the JS, maybe they will also show a bit of the chemistry they had with the applicant. Maybe they will be a bit subjective in their presentation. So it might be a disservice as well to the whole process. So I'm not a fan of this, but I can understand why it's done.
And from my own personal experience, I can tell you that it becomes particularly demotivating when the MC is not bound to what you set up in your assessment. As I recall, at least 2 of my colleagues frequently after the monitoring committee told me that they will quit their job. I mean, I knew how to take it. It was the immediate reaction, but it is really frustrating if such things happen and you're then sitting there suddenly representing a project without knowing it and getting attacked on things you haven't been aware whatsoever about. Okay, there is one question to Chiara. Obviously, it raised an alarm, as you've put it now, that things will be adjusted in informal meetings. I got it like you need in so many cases the expertise of the national information points to get any assessment of an institution in the context of the particular country. This is what I fully understand, because it's not easy. At least that was my experience. And I can imagine it's the same for you. It's not easy for another country to assess certain institution. But yeah, please.
Yeah, is not correct because I'm trying to explain better the flux, the steps. First of all, we prepared a first scores for each proposals and send to NIPS and waiting, and we wait from NIPS, from both of them, from Albania and Montenegro, their scoring without sharing with them our scoring of each proposal. Of course, NIPS check only some specific criteria. As I said before, only partnership and only cross-border, not cross-border cooperation, only impact. So only both these two kinds of criteria. Then they send by email, not formally, by email, their list of scoring to us, and then we organize an informal meeting between both the NIPS and all the JS, all the member of JS. Then when we didn't find any kind of common understanding of the specific score, we made an average, simply. We made an average of the three different scores. Of course, we use two kinds of scoring scale, from 0 to 3 and from 0 to 5. So according to the different kind of criteria, you can imagine we have four typology of criteria: strategic, operational, sustainability, sustainable criteria, and then additional criteria. Then they have only 5 of 6 criteria in order to give some points. So all this flux is traced. Then we have the email, we have the exchange, and then we after the meeting, after this kind of informal meeting, we send to the steering committee the final release of our scoring, and so the ranking list in this way, with the comments, with our understanding, and with a short description of each proposal, because we know very well that also not only the member of monitoring committee, but also the members of steering committee don't read a lot, don't read all the proposal, all the application forms, of course.
Thank you, Chiara.
I hope I've replied to the question.
Thanks a lot. So to me, a structured use of diverse expertise to come to good conclusions. And yeah, one of the 100 ways to approach it. We are coming to an end, and maybe I would now invite Jan, as I think a long-standing person working as a managing authority, governance of monitoring committees. What do you think is the key ingredient to make it work? Because I see it also, it's a process, it's a decision-making process. And of course, how you govern the process, let's say, is quite crucial. What do you think? What is most important from your perspective?
I think it's always related to composition of the monitoring committee. If there is a balanced share between stakeholders which are somehow directly interested in outcomes of the monitoring committee, like regions who benefit from it directly, or whether it's more balanced or shifted towards ministries who are experts on particular topics and are not directly interested in any projects, or if it's rather municipalities, or if it's rather entities like networks of NGOs. I think it's better to have those who don't have direct interest in the projects, because otherwise we have to solve a lot of conflicts of interest all the time. All their decision making is somehow dubious of bias, and also because they are politicians, they are not expected to read a lot and like to read. So they are usually not very much familiar with the projects, except of the projects who comes from their region, who they support inevitably because they have some interest in it. But of course, composition of monitoring committee is a political decision also. In environment of Czech cross-border cooperation programs, we also have different attitudes. In Austrian Czech monitoring committee, there is unanimity not on the level of delegations, but on the level of particular members, which seems like amazing democracy. But in the end, there could be one member who can block any decision. So that's probably also not good. If there will be only majority voting, then we can argue that some of the projects simply made it because there was some bartered support, which could be actually quite close around the edge. So that's probably difficult. I think it's all related to the composition of the monitoring committee and on some sort of a culture of the people who are represented there. Then again, if it's political entities, rather the personalities changed after every election, and you need to work on the culture again. So that's another reason why it would be better to have rather networks, whether ministries, whether topical experts, representatives of interest groups, but rather in general sense. But it's difficult to achieve.
I thank you. So the whole question was not staged, the answer was not staged, but I really thank you for sharing your thoughts. And with that, I think I would now open the floor to anybody acting as a managing authority or as a JS who would like to share their observations on this quite tricky aspect of governing a monitoring committee over longer periods, because that's, yeah, it's a job requiring a lot of expertise. It is an evolving culture. This is an experience we completely share, Jan. I've seen also the evolvement of a culture in decision making over time. Yeah, I would be happy if somebody from the audience now maybe simply dares raise a hand or open your mic and share a bit the experience. I know it's been a long day, and we're grateful that we have still 126 people in the room. So anybody is welcome to just raise your hand. Otherwise, maybe Nico, owing to your long-standing experience, would you have a few words on this aspect of governing a monitoring committee as a tricky body, not always behaving as you wish, as you would like to, of course.
Well, thanks. I'm not sure I can say much about it. The only element, it's very specific for us, you know, because we had 30 countries. Now we have 29 countries. So this makes the governance of this program quite challenging, I would use. And just for the history, we were coming from the 2000-2006 period to 4 different programs divided with 7 countries. And we started Interreg 4C 2007-2013 with one single area with all these countries. And it has taken us at least 7 years to build the real trust between the GS and the partner states. So what I mean by that, it's a long process. And it has getting better and better in the governance of this program. The only challenge where we didn't find the perfect solution so far is that what I said earlier, in such a big committee, the technical input is very strong, and the political the decision or power has difficulty to be heard sometimes. And we know there was sometimes a bit of frustration on the partner states' side because they had the feeling they just had to agree on everything the GS was proposing. So the idea of involving more the member states in the day-to-day process, in the quality assessment, as I mentioned earlier, had proven to be quite successful in building this trust and member states regaining this feeling of having the power, making really the final decisions. By the way, well, it's too complicated to explain today. We tried this 2-step approach in the assessment, doing first the strategic criteria, and then for the one who passed the strategic criteria, doing the operational criteria. We did that during the 2014-2020 period, mainly for the reason that the member states were not so happy. They were had the impression they were losing the power at the strategic level because it was done through written procedure. We were not even meeting. We will revise this approach now, and we will do the full assessment in one stage. So the member states have the full picture, and we can really meet and spend times on a strategic decision of the program. Although, of course, the strategic assessment had a bigger weight for the final recommendation and final assessment. But that's part of the reason why we came back to this 2-step procedure in terms of assessment. I hope.
Thanks a lot, Nico, for openly sharing these observations. Now turning also my eyes to Nathalie, if you would like to comment on this aspect of governance of the MC, or this fine line between...
Maybe also, Bernhard, maybe a little bit also as concluding remarks, because I will have to dash quickly out very soon. It's 1 o'clock. Well, governance is of course the tricky part. It's even more tricky than assessment, because assessment, at least you have, you can bring here an element of objectivity and expertise. In governance, it's about something different. And so I retain from what we're discussing and from the Commission's perspective, the word trust, which is absolutely fundamental. Trust in each other, but also trust in the system we establish. And that's why I would recommend associating the monitoring committee very early on in actually setting up the system, so that if they buy in the system itself, then there will be more trust along the way. I love the way Jan describes this, the different types of method used, democracy, but you know, democracy is also about trust and about playing the game, basically. Yeah? If you sell yourself as a democrat, but then you act as a bit of a little dictator, then you know it's not democracy. And trading things before a monitoring committee and then pretending that you're democratic is a contradiction. And you're right, Jan. There is no perfect solution. And if we have people among the groups who don't want to play the game, who only have one interest, and it's a very local, regional interest, then we will never succeed, because they don't accept the rules of the game. I would also like to say, don't be afraid to adjust your methods during programming. There is nothing preventing you from saying at some point, well, you know, we've tried this, and the lessons we learn are these and these and those, and we would like to suggest a modification of the process. It's absolutely fine to do that. It's not because something is decided in 2022, that it still has to be done in the same way in 2027. So don't feel even adjusting the monitoring committee's ways of working or composition can be done also on the basis of the experience that you have early on. And then I retain also that the fact that we need to be probably a little bit creative. If we go back to assessment, you know, this hybrid assessment, we only discussed internal or external. I heard nice examples of maybe hybrid assessments where certain dimensions can be done by experts from outside, but others maybe should be retained within the secretariat or the managing authority. So we need to be creative and we need to adapt, I would say. But if we don't take the time to build trust, and if we don't give enough time, enough attention to relationships and roles and responsibilities, we will never really get there. So let's not forget this. It's about a group of people who need to trust each other and who need to know that everybody has the interest of the program area at heart and not hidden agendas. Difficult to achieve. We agree, huh? But you can understand why I have to say that. Otherwise, the Commission can take over all monitoring committees, and we can select all projects in a, direct management like in Horizon. But what would be the point? Then we would completely lose ownership. So it's give and take basically. Yeah, it's a difficult thing. And I will have to rush, Bernhard. Okay.
I thank you, Nathalie, for taking part. Thanks a lot. And yeah, it remains a pleasure for me to say thank you to all of you for staying with us for such a long time. And of course, we will upload the presentations. We will provide also short videos, but that might take a bit of time. And we will share also all the materials on the website under the event. And yes, you've seen there is no one size fits all approach, but it's 100 programs, 100 different approaches. But I hope you take home from this session that you can learn from each other. And you're also kindly invited, if there is a particular interest, please turn also to us. We will try to find people in other programs who may have an idea, who may have a different practice and might be able to tell you what worked, what didn't work. My colleague Iris, she posted now in the chat also the link to the evaluation survey. And we are really kindly asking you to complete the survey. It helps us simply to improve our services. And I would like to thank now Chiara. I would like to thank Jan, Maciej, Gabi, Nicolas for openly sharing. Thanks a lot for that.